I scattered my husband's ashes on a Tuesday morning in November, 8 months ago. The wind came off the lake and took them before I was ready. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the last of him. I was wrong. It started at the post office, of all places. I had gone in to pick up a package, a wool cardigan I ordered from a catalog, because my daughter-in-law had mentioned I looked cold at Thanksgiving, and I suppose I wanted to prove her wrong by actually being warm. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon, the kind of gray December day where the light gives up before 4 o'clock and everybody moves a little slower, a little quieter, like they're all waiting for something. I was standing in line. There were maybe 4 people ahead of me, a young mother with a stroller, an older gentleman mailing something flat and important looking. I was reading the postal rate sign on the wall, not because I needed to, just because that's what you do when you're standing in line and you don't have your phone out, and that's when I saw him. Or I thought I did. He was walking out the side door, the one that leads to the parking lot on Clement Street. He had on a dark green jacket that I recognized immediately because I had bought it. 3 years ago, Christmas, I picked it out myself from the Eddie Bauer catalog and had it monogrammed with his initials on the inside collar, because he always mixed up his coat with his brother's at family dinners. H.A.W. Howard Allen Whitmore, my husband, the man I had watched take his last breath in a hospital bed at St. Semini, Francis Medical Center, the man whose hand I held for 6 hours after the monitors went flat because I couldn't figure out how to let go, the man whose ashes I had scattered 8 months ago on a Tuesday morning in November, over a lake he loved. I dropped my keys. The woman behind me said something. I didn't hear her. I was already moving toward the side door, leaving the line, leaving the package I had come to pick up, leaving everything. By the time I pushed through that door, the parking lot was half empty and quiet, and he was gone. I stood there in the cold with my coat open and my heart doing something I don't have a word for. Not quite fear, not quite grief. Something older than both of those. Something that starts in your stomach and moves up through your chest and parks itself right behind your eyes and makes the whole world look slightly wrong, like a painting someone hung a 1/4 inch too low. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was a man in a similar coat. I told myself grief does this. It shows you the dead in the faces of strangers. It finds them in crowds. It plays tricks on you for months and sometimes years. And that's just what loss does to a person. I got back in line. I picked up my cardigan. I drove home. I didn't sleep that night. Howard and I had been married for 38 years. We met at a church potluck in 1985. I had brought a green bean casserole, and he had brought nothing, which should have told me something, but he was so charming about it that I forgave him immediately. He worked in insurance, commercial lines mostly. He was good at it because he was the kind of man who made you feel like everything was going to be fine even when it wasn't, even when it absolutely was not. We had one son together. His name is Paul. He's 41 now, lives about 2 hours north of me in Sacramento, works in logistics. We talk on the phone on Sundays, and he visits maybe 3 times a year, and I love him the way you love someone who is fundamentally decent, but has never quite learned how to be fully present in a room. When Howard got sick, it was fast. That's the thing about pancreatic cancer. You don't get a long goodbye. You get about 4 months from diagnosis to funeral, and most of those months are spent trying to keep up with paperwork and insurance calls and prescription schedules. So by the time the end comes, you're too exhausted to do anything except sit there and hold someone's hand and watch the light change in the room. He passed on a Thursday morning. March. Paul handled the arrangements. I was grateful for that. I could not have done it myself. The life insurance paid out in July. $240,000. It felt obscene to have that money sitting in my checking account, so I moved most of it to a CD at my credit union and tried not to think about it. By November, I thought I was doing all right. I had gone back to my Tuesday watercolor class. I was walking the neighborhood in the mornings. I was cooking real meals again, at least 3 or 4 nights a week. And then I saw that green jacket walking out a side door. I want to tell you I let it go. I want to tell you I chalked it up to grief and moved on and didn't spend the next 3 days replaying the way he walked. The set of his shoulders, the slight forward lean he always had, like he was perpetually 5 seconds away from somewhere he needed to be. I can't tell you that, because it's not true. On Saturday, I drove back to the post office parking lot, and I sat there for 45 minutes. I don't know what I was hoping to find. I just needed to sit in the place where it happened and convince myself it had been nothing. A man parked 2 spots over and got out of his car, and I watched him walk toward the building, and he was nothing like Howard, and I felt both relieved and devastated at the same time, which is a feeling I had become accustomed to by then. I went home. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat down at the kitchen table, which still had Howard's chair on one side, with a small stack of seed catalogs on it because I hadn't moved them, and I thought about the green jacket. The monogram. Nobody else had that monogram. I had the embroidery done at a little shop on Irving Street that has since closed down. The woman who did it was named something Polish that I never learned to pronounce correctly. She had used navy thread. Howard had complained that navy and green didn't match. I had told him that it wasn't meant to match, it was meant to identify. We had argued about it for approximately 11 minutes, which was pretty standard for us. I started thinking about Paul. Paul had handled the cremation. Paul had identified the body at the hospital. Paul had signed the paperwork. I tried to remember if I had ever seen the paperwork. I called Paul that Sunday. I kept the conversation normal for the first 20 minutes. How's the job? How's Sandra? How is Ethan's soccer tournament? And then I said casually, the way you say something when you are trying to sound casual and you know you don't sound casual at all, I said, Paul, did you keep copies of the death certificates? There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I've been listening to that boy since before he could talk. And I know every single one of his pauses, and this one was wrong. Sure, Mom, I've got them filed somewhere. Why? I'm updating some accounts, I said. The credit union asked for another copy. I'll scan one and email it to you. That would be great, sweetheart. He emailed it 3 days later. I looked at it carefully. Everything appeared in order. I don't know what I was looking for. I just knew something was sitting wrong in my chest, had been sitting wrong since the parking lot, and the document didn't make it better. The death certificate listed the cause of death as pancreatic cancer. The attending physician was Dr. Reyes, who had indeed been Howard's oncologist. The date was correct. The location was correct. But there was a small line near the bottom about body disposition, and it listed the name of the cremation service. And I realized, sitting at my kitchen table with that document on my laptop screen, that I had never once spoken directly to that cremation service. Paul had handled everything. I had not been in a state to question anything. I had simply trusted my son. I looked up the cremation service online. It still existed. It was called Serenity Path Cremation Services in San Bruno. I found a phone number. I stared at that phone number for a long time. Then I picked up the phone. The woman I spoke to was kind but careful. She could not release information to anyone other than the designated next of kin, she explained, which in Howard's case was our son Paul. I said, I'm his wife. She said she was sorry, but the authorization on file listed our son as the point of contact, and she wasn't able to share details with anyone else without his written consent. I said, I understand. Can you at least tell me whether a pickup was made on the date listed on this document? She said she was sorry. She really was sorry. I could hear it in her voice. I hung up. I sat in the silence of my kitchen for a very long time. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The refrigerator made its small hum. Howard's seed catalog sat in his chair. If my husband had not been cremated, then where was he? And if he was alive, then who were the ashes I had scattered over that lake? I need to tell you about Howard and money, because it matters. Howard worked in insurance for 30 years, and he understood better than most people how certain kinds of financial instruments work. He had taken out his life insurance policy himself 20 years ago, and he was the one who managed it. I knew it existed. I knew roughly how much it was worth. I had never looked at the actual policy documents because that wasn't how we divided things. He handled the money, I handled the house and the social calendar and the appointments and the thousand small logistics of keeping a family running. I understand now that this was a mistake. I don't say this to be harsh to myself. I say it because I think a lot of women my age made the same arrangement and didn't realize until too late what it meant to be on the outside of your own financial life. $240,000 is not a small amount of money. I started going through files. Howard had a filing cabinet in the small room he used as a home office. After he died, I had closed the door to that room and mostly left it. Paul had gone in once to look for some documents, but I had not done a thorough review. I went in on a Tuesday afternoon in January, 2 months after the post office, because I had spent those 2 months trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I sat down on the floor in front of that filing cabinet and I started going through it folder by folder. Most of it was what you'd expect. Tax returns going back 15 years, car insurance, the mortgage documents, paid off 7 years ago, thank God, old bank statements, and then, near the back of the bottom drawer, in a manila folder with no label, I found a cell phone bill. Not our cell phone bill. Not the account I knew about, the family plan we'd had since 2009. A separate bill, a number I didn't recognize, going back at least 2 years. I sat on the floor of that office with that bill in my hands, and I felt the particular cold that comes when something you suspected becomes something you know. The phone number had a 916 area code, Sacramento. Paul lives in Sacramento. I did not call Paul. Not yet. Instead, I drove back to the post office. I know that probably sounds strange, but that parking lot had become the place where this thing had started, and I needed to be there to think. I sat in my car and I thought about what I actually knew versus what I was assuming. What I knew, I had seen a man in a green jacket with the same build and walk as my husband. I had been unable to speak to the cremation service directly. I had found a phone bill for an unknown number, and that number was local to where my son lived. What I was assuming, a great deal. I needed something more concrete, and I knew there was one person who might give it to me if I could just get them in the right conversation. I called my sister-in-law, Howard's younger sister. Her name is Bonnie, and she and Howard had never been particularly close. There had been some falling out years ago over their mother's estate, the kind of old family fracture that never fully heals. But I had stayed friendly with her over the years. I liked her. She was direct in a way that Howard sometimes wasn't. I told her I had found something and I needed to ask her something strange. She said, "Okay." I said, "Did you ever see Howard after March? After he died?" The silence on the other end of the line was not like Paul's silence. It was different. It was the silence of someone who had been waiting for a question. "I saw someone," she said finally, "in September, at the Home Depot in Daly City. I thought I was losing my mind. I decided it was just someone who looked like him." "Green jacket?" I said. She didn't answer right away. "Bonnie," I said. "Lord," she said quietly. "Yes, I found him myself. I need you to understand that I did not send anyone else to do this. I went myself, because he was my husband and 38 years means something even when it has been poisoned, and I needed to look him in the face. It took me 3 weeks. I will not go into every detail of how I did it, because some of it I'm not entirely proud of. I paid a woman I found online who does what she called asset and location research, which is a polite way of saying she finds people who don't want to be found. She charged me $600 and she earned every cent. She found a lease agreement, a name I didn't recognize, but an address I could find. The address was a house in Vallejo, an hour's drive, nothing dramatic about it. Just a street in a neighborhood with ranch-style houses and mature oak trees, and the occasional basketball hoop in the driveway. The kind of street you drive down 1,000 times in your life and notice nothing. I drove there on a Sunday morning in early February. I parked down the block. I sat in my car with my coffee and I waited. An hour later, a man came out the front door. He was wearing a gray sweater, not the green jacket. His hair was slightly longer than I remembered, and he'd grown a beard which I had never seen on him in 38 years. But the way he moved, that slight forward lean 5 seconds from somewhere he needed to be, I would know it anywhere. In anybody. In any life. It was Howard. He walked to his car. A car I didn't recognize. He drove away. I sat in mine, and I couldn't breathe for about 2 full minutes. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I got out, and I walked to the front door, and I knocked. A woman answered. Mid-50s, I'd guess. Dark hair going silver at the temples. Pretty in a practical sort of way, wearing a fleece pullover and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at me the way you look at someone you don't recognize but are trying to be polite to. "Can I help you?" she said. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. "My name is Helen. The man who just left in that car, is his name Howard?" Something moved across her face. Not quite fear. Not quite recognition. Something careful. "Who are you?" she said. "I'm his wife," I said. "His legal wife. We've been married for 38 years. He was declared dead 8 months ago. The insurance company paid out $240,000. And I would like an explanation." She stared at me. I stared back. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside. Her name was Renata, and she had known Howard for 4 years. He had told her he was divorced. He had told her his ex-wife was difficult, complicated, that the separation had been painful. He had used my name Helen when talking about me. I know this because she said it, said Howard mentioned to Helen, and the way she said it, carefully like she was handling something fragile, told me she was as blindsided as I was. She did not know about the insurance money, or at least she said she didn't. I believed her. She had the look of someone whose reality was being dismantled in real time. She told me that Howard had shown up at her door in late March, 2 weeks after his supposed death, with a duffel bag and a story about needing to disappear from a bad situation. She had thought he meant trouble with money. Debts, maybe. She had not asked enough questions. She had been lonely, and he had been Howard, and Howard was very good at making people feel like everything was going to be fine. I asked her if Paul had ever been to the house. She said yes, several times. I thanked her. I drove home. I called Paul that night. I had thought about how I wanted to do this for the entire drive back. I had rehearsed it. I had planned to be calm, deliberate, to give him an opportunity to explain himself before I said what I knew. But when he answered, something happened to my voice. It went very quiet and very steady, the way a voice gets when a person is holding something enormous very carefully, and I said, "Paul, I know your father is alive. I know you knew. And I need you to tell me everything right now, or the next call I make will be to the police." The silence this time lasted a long time. Then my son said, "Mom," and I said, "Don't," and he told me. Howard had come to Paul first. In February, a full month before he died, while he was still supposedly sick, still receiving hospice care in our guest room, still letting me hold his hand and cry at his bedside, he had gone to Paul and told him he needed help, that he had made some bad investments, business decisions he'd hidden from me for years, that there were people he owed money to, that he needed to disappear. Paul had said no at first. He wanted me to believe that. Maybe it's even true. But eventually, he had said yes. He had found the cremation service willing to falsify paperwork. I will not say how, because it is still under investigation. He had helped Howard establish a new identity. He had helped him find the rental in Vallejo. He had visited his father there 10 times over 8 months, while calling me every Sunday like nothing was wrong, while asking how my watercolor class was going, while expressing appropriate concern about whether I was eating enough. He had let me scatter what I believed were my husband's ashes over a lake. He had stood next to me and watched me cry. When he finished talking, I was very quiet for a long time. Then I said, "I need you to give me 24 hours before you tell your father I know." Paul said, "Mom, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to do what I should have done the moment I saw that jacket." I called an attorney that night. A woman in my watercolor class had mentioned her once. A family law attorney named someone I trusted. One phone call into 2 hours of being walked through exactly what my situation was, exactly what fraud had been committed, exactly what my options were. The next morning, I called the insurance company's fraud division. I had the policy number. I had the death certificate. I had the address in Vallejo. I told the woman on the phone everything I knew in order as clearly as I could. She took 20 minutes of notes, and then she said, Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to know that what you've described constitutes multiple felonies. We will be coordinating with local law enforcement. I said, I know. I called Bonnie and told her what I'd found. She cried. Then she said that wasn't why she cried. She was crying because she wasn't surprised, and that was somehow worse. I called my attorney back and told her I was ready to file. I did not call Paul. I did not warn Howard. 4 days later, 2 men from the Solano County Sheriff's Office knocked on the door of a ranch-style house in Vallejo, and my husband, the man I had married 38 years ago, the man I thought I had buried, the man whose ashes I had scattered over a lake, was arrested for insurance fraud, identity fraud, and falsifying a death record. Paul was arrested the following week after a separate investigation. I found out later that the ashes I had scattered were cremated animal remains purchased from a third-party service. I sat with that information for a long time. I'm still sitting with it some days. There is a question I get asked when I tell people this story. The question is some version of, "How are you?" And the true answer is complicated. I am angry. I don't think the anger will leave completely for a very long time, maybe ever, and I've stopped expecting it to. My husband chose a lie over 38 years of building a life together. My son chose his father over me. Those are not things that heal quickly or cleanly. The insurance company recovered the funds. Most of them. There are legal proceedings I'm not going to discuss in detail because they're still ongoing. My attorney has been excellent. Paul and I have not spoken since his arrest. I've thought about what I want that relationship to be on the other side of all this, and I don't have an answer yet. Maybe I won't for a long time. I loved my son for 41 years. That love doesn't vanish, but it has changed shape into something I don't fully recognize yet, and I'm not going to rush figuring out what it is. Howard and I are legally still married, which is a strange thing to carry around. The divorce proceedings are underway. It will take time. I went back to my Tuesday watercolor class. I've started painting landscapes again. I went through a period of only painting still lifes, bowls of fruit and vases, things that stayed where you put them. But lately I've gone back to open water, skies, the way light changes on a lake in November. I don't think I'll go back to that lake, the one where I scattered what I thought were his ashes. But I found another one, about 30 miles east, that I didn't know before. It's quieter. Nobody I know has ever been there. I go on Tuesday morning sometimes after class, and I sit at the edge of it. I am 64 years old. I have a house that is paid for and a credit union account and a watercolor class on Tuesdays and a sister-in-law who calls me now every week just to check in. I have a good attorney. I have a very nice wool cardigan that I finally picked up from the post office. Eventually, after all of this, because I had already paid for it and I refused to waste a perfectly good cardigan over any of this. I am going to be all right. I believed in him for 38 years. I can believe in myself for whatever comes next. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand or cosmic sense. I'm not someone who believes the universe keeps a ledger. But I do believe that the choices people make have weight, and that weight goes somewhere eventually. It doesn't disappear just because time passes. It doesn't disappear just because someone is charming about it. Howard made his choices over years, maybe decades. Small deceptions first, I imagine. Financial decisions hidden from me. A separate phone. A separate life being quietly assembled while I packed his lunch and made his dentist appointments and thought I knew the shape of my own marriage. He chose to fake his death rather than have an honest conversation. He chose to take money that wasn't his to take. He chose to let me grieve. Every one of those was a decision made by a man who had convinced himself that his comfort was worth more than my dignity. And I think that kind of thinking, where your own avoidance outweighs another person's reality, has a way of expanding until it fills every room. Paul made his choices too. I know my son. I know he didn't walk into it easily, But he walked into it, and there's something I keep coming back to, which is that the cost of a lie is almost always paid by the person who was lied to, not the person who told it. Paul got to live with his secret for 8 months. I got to scatter what I believed were my husband's ashes. That imbalance is something I think he'll carry for a long time, and I think somewhere in him he already knows it. What I want to say, and I say this as someone who spent 38 years being proud of my ability to trust people, is that trusting someone is not the same as handing them your entire understanding of your own life. I trusted Howard with our finances because that was how we divided things. I trusted Paul with the arrangements because I was grieving and I couldn't hold any more than I was already holding. I don't regret being a person who trusts, but I understand now, in my bones, that there is a difference between faith and willful ignorance, and for a long time I mistook one for the other. The intelligence part of this, and I mean intelligence in the plainest sense, the kind you develop by paying attention, is knowing your own life well enough that no one can rewrite it without you noticing. Know where the money is. Know who signed what. Know the name of the cremation service. These are not romantic things to know, but they are yours. And the part about strength, the part I'm proudest of, if I'm honest, is that when I had enough to go on, I went myself. I didn't send anyone. I didn't wait for someone to confirm what I already suspected. I drove to that house in Vallejo on a Sunday morning, and I knocked on the door and I looked him in the face. Not because I wasn't afraid. I was. But because 38 years of my life deserved someone willing to show up for them, and the only person I could count on to do that was me. I am 64 years old, and I am still learning what I'm capable of. That part, at least, I owe to Howard.